I'm Dave Heumann, and today I'd like to talk about something that I like to call string handling, which is sort of an umbrella term for a lot of other techniques that guitar players use to distinguish their tone from other guitar players. If you've noticed, sometimes people can play the same guitar and sound very different from one another, or guitarists might play a variety of different guitars and still sound like themselves. This is a bit of an exploration to look at some of the reasons why that might be the case. So for the first example, I'd like to use a lick that I played in a song called Fair and Tender Ladies that I recorded fairly recently. And this is just the intro lick. It's a little lick, but in this lick there are a few different techniques that are used. So we can look at this a little bit more in depth, and it'll give you an idea of some of the smaller techniques that go into this larger thing of giving someone an impression of what a guitar player sounds like in a more personal way. So I'll begin by playing the lick. Very simple, very short lick. There are a couple different things that I do here that are actual techniques here. So let's take it bit by bit. Let's do this lick here. First of all, there's a hammer on here. There's a hammer-on there. So these are actually two different kinds of hammer-ons that I'm using throughout the lick. The first one is where I'm doing it in a way that separates the notes into two notes. And then another one where it is actually just kind of sliding up into a note, but done very quickly after the note is being picked, so that it gives the illusion of it only being one note when in fact it's two. It really just sounds like one note, doesn't it? Because the hammer-on is done so quickly that the ear processes it as one note, but it's like a note with a certain kind of character, and that character is the actual hammer-on itself. So here, that's clearly two notes. I'm picking the first one down here on the 7th fret and then hammering on at the 9th. And then here, I'm also on the 7th and 9th frets, but on the G string. And I'm doing it quickly so it just sounds like one note. And in context. And then what happens is I'm applying vibrato. Now, vibrato is something that a lot of guitar players, everyone seems to sort of do it differently from one another. There's a lot of variation in the types of vibratos that different guitar players use. I mostly use what's called a standard vibrato, which is a vertical vibrato. That is to say that it's going up and down in relation to the floor, rather than a horizontal vibrato, which is also called a classical vibrato. And so here, we'll back up and do it in context and just check out how this vibrato happens. Now you notice I don't start it right away. It's good a lot of times to leave a little bit of a space between playing the note, articulating the note, whether it's picked right off or hammer on it into like I actually do in this example. It's good to let the note ring for a fraction of a second before applying the vibrato, and you notice that this is something that string players, like violin players and such, often do, as well as a lot of probably maybe your favorite guitarists often do this. But some people just go into it right away, and some people also play vibratos at varying speeds, various degrees of depth. Now, I tend not to usually do it that deep. One of the reasons why is because when you do that, you're actually bending the string, and it does make it sharper. And the more you do that, the sharper the overall note is going to be. And that's kind of like an exaggerated effect there, but it is actually similar to how some blues guitarists and how some rock players use vibrato. Now, if I were a different player entirely, I might do that lick with the horizontal vibrato, which there's nothing wrong with. It's just a different way of going about it, and it produces a bit of a different effect. That is a vibrato that's like this. Now, in this case, it is making the note both flatter and sharper than the original note, and I'll show you why. Because if I'm playing this note, and I'm bringing it, I'm sort of squeezing it in the direction of the guitar body, that makes it flatter. And if I'm going away from the guitar body towards the neck, or towards the headstock rather, that makes it sharper. Doing both has a kind of going up and down, flatter and sharper. It's an interesting technique, and it is something that you see a lot of classical players or people with nylon string guitars doing, because the nylon strings don't take so well to bending. And that's another thing that's going to be a different sound. You know, you're going to be able to hear that, and maybe not with just the example of the vibrato, but when all these techniques are factored together, they give a guitar player their own sort of personal signature. Now, let's say I wanted to do some string bends and the horizontal vibrato in the same example, the same lick. Very different effect, and it could even sound like a different player entirely. Let's try this again with even more string bends. And so I'm using a deeper vibrato, and I bent the string up there instead of sliding. So, you know, all these little things that, you know, you can practice trying it different ways, they're going to give you a sort of signature sound. And that signature sound has nothing to do with the guitar or the amp you're playing. It has to do really just with what's happening with your fingers. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. And we can look at something else. Now, right now, with this, I've really just focused on the left hand, but what about the right hand? What are some of the differences here with right hand technique? Like, I'm using a pick for the purposes of this lesson. Of course, you could also play with your fingers. A lot of fantastic guitarists use fingers only and don't use picks. However, I'm mostly a pick player, so that's what I'm going to cover. But, you know, just with that, there are differences in how things sound with alternating picking or just downstrokes. Like, let's look at this example. This is the vocal melody that I'm playing on guitar, the vocal melody from a song called The French Girl. Now, in that, I was playing using alternating picking, which is what I normally do, although sometimes using all downstrokes is good. It will give you a very different effect. Subtle, but there is a bit of a difference that you can hear. Sometimes if you play a phrase using only downstrokes, it can have a bit of a rougher sound, and as opposed to a smoother sound using alternating picking. Of course, alternating picking is good for other things too, such as playing fast. I mean, there is a limit to how fast you can play using only downstrokes. You know, if you're just doing this, the pick has to travel back up for you to hit the next note. You're making things more efficient if you're also playing an upstroke as in addition to a downstroke. And that's what makes alternate picking a more efficient choice for playing faster versus only playing downstrokes, but it has a different character as well. These are just a few of the techniques that, you know, guitar players use all the time, and that separate one guitar player from another. Their choice of using certain techniques versus others, or using techniques in a certain way versus others, is something that I'd be happy to discuss with you in more detail. If you look for me on Lessonface, it'd be great to set up a lesson and we can explore this further. Thanks for watching.